So first we have this epigraph, right? One
Yeah.
beyond the zero, and it says, "Nature does not know extinction. All it knows is transformation. Everything science has taught me and continues to teach me strengthens my belief in the continuity of our spiritual existence after death." Eventually, you learn that Slothrop had like a bunch of like experiments done to him as a child, and now whenever he has sex, these German V2 rockets are the site that he has sex in, the rockets, like they fall like in that similar place, right? And eventually he
Yeah.
recognizes this and he decides to sort of figure out what's going on, why this is, what is this mystery of this like new like supersonic V2 called like rocket 00000. It refers to something that is just completely pointless. I mean, like, what
Hmm.
exactly is the purpose? Like there's nothing really compelling about that. And to the extent that you could derive any kind of metaphorical content from this, it doesn't matter that you can. You have to adjudicate what that metaphor is and whether it's effective. If you're going to essentially say that V2 rockets are big penises, in the sky, right? Oh my God, look at, patriarchal men doing the things that patriarchal men have done since time immemorial. Now, since we have the formation of rockets, it's the most kind of dramatic version of this. They are destroying the world with their huge egos and penises. Like these are things that have been tackled for a very long time, right? You
Right.
have you have this kind of symbolism, going back to the Greeks, going back to ancient Chinese poetry, right? Like this is like going on forever. And the fact that this becomes like the controlling metaphor for the text, that should immediately alarm you. Like this cannot possibly go in a proper direction unless it's like completely subverted in some way. And then also like there's this other part, right, where this like 0000 rocket has like this, in German it's called like a black box, right? And it's like like what is that, like the vagina? And eventually like
Yeah.
the guy that gets put into the rocket, right, Gottfried, um he's then revealed to be like, no, the black box is actually him. He's the black box, right? And it's like it's all these like like topsy turvy, like like twists and turns that
Yeah.
really it's just like, okay, so like when you discover this new thing, right? Okay, now what? What's the point? You discover this next thing. Okay, what's the point, right? It's not enough to merely have a twist and turn, twist and turn, twist and turn. They have to go somewhere. And the crazy part about it is like I can imagine, so like most of the Thomas Pynchon fans, like especially like big fans of this book, they're probably the type of people that absolutely hate, like, oh, I hate Hollywood action films, right? It's all plot, it's all action, there's nothing really to attach to. But the fact that this book needs so many like fan synopses and summaries which often themselves are contradictory from one another, and
Hmm.
oftentimes like even don't make sense like in and of themselves, that is like a kind of de facto action film, right? That is Hollywood schlock, right? That means the book has to be absolutely plot driven, because you're essentially saying all you have left here are the machinations.
And some of the people in that subreddit, they'll even openly admit that they don't get the book, or they don't like the book, or they couldn't finish the book, or I've wanted to reread it a second time, or you have to read it 3 or 4 or 5 times,
Mm-hmm.
to even get it. Whereas obviously with good or great works of art, you want to go back and reread because there's more to it. There's more to
Mm-hmm.
discover that you would have missed simply because it's done well. In this case, it's such a mess that I mean, nobody could focus on this book, I don't think, for any extended period of time. Your brain checks out. It's just the equivalent of putting your head in a microwave for a while, and I mean, everything just gets frazzled, and it's so inconsistent. I said this to you in my notes. It's inconsistent across the whole thing, but page to page, line to line, paragraph to paragraph. I mean, he can have some decent passages, and then it goes nowhere or fizzles out, or he's back to the nonsensical rambling writing style again, and so on. And I think that you made the point already that I was definitely going to jump in on and just say this book by the fan base is hermetically sealed and protected with the
Mm-hmm.
all encompassing. You either simply don't get it, or it was all meant to be slapstick and a farce to begin with, and to lampoon all of society or the writing of books itself. It's anything you want to make up, and that's the problem, is you can map almost anything onto this, because you can't map really anything at all. So it's therefore it's just open for whatever you want it to be. And people will defend it tooth and nail, but a lot of the time, to your point, I mean, either they'll make a few sentences of inroads on trying to defend it, and they'll contradict themselves or admit that they don't really have any legs to stand on, or it'll just be the whole bro doesn't get it, obviously bro just doesn't get it, and then there's absolutely no response, right?
Yeah.
And nobody in that whole thread takes on even a few paragraphs worth of really trying to answer the criticisms that Dan levies. And it's just clear that nobody's willing to put the effort in to do that, and probably deep down knowing if they tried to, it's a lost cause. So it's really just so unpleasurable to read, is the bottom line. It's really just no fun at all. So if you want to start actually reading some passages here.
So like in the first page, right, the opening paragraph. So first of all, right, the book has like the subsections are that you have these like little squares. So like this is a newer edition, obviously, but in the older edition, I think the squares were like colored in or something, and you have like all these like analyses from people that are like, oh, like these squares, they look like microfilm, right? This book is like a movie, like, and there's like a lot of analysis paid to like literally what is like supposed to be, these are just breaks, right? These are fucking breaks in between sections. They're supposed to denote the passage of time, the kind of like, you sort of, get themes together before you move on to something else. This is how it works, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that, these are like little symbols. I mean, like, like we could talk about like the fact that Kurt Vonnegut in his novels, like he has illustrations, right? But we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on the illustrations, right? Because like it's humor, it's like a nice little offset, but that's not really what the book is about. I feel like there's been more analysis done of these like squares and what they might mean than actual illustrations, right? In Vonnegut's novels, right? Which is which is just kind of crazy. But anyway, this is how the first chapter begins. A screaming comes across the sky that has happened before, but there is nothing to compare it to now. And when I first read this, I was like, all right, this is probably a reference to, knowing that this book is about the V2 rockets. This is probably a reference to like the launch of a V2 rocket or something like that. And out of curiosity, I was just like looking at different, there's a Wikipedia, or rather there's a wiki, right, for Gravity's Rainbow, not Wikipedia, but, the wiki kind of like, system. So there's a Gravity's Rainbow wiki, or gravitiesrainbow.pynchonwiki.com. And so in this kind of like, it's supposed to be like a blow by blow sort of analysis of what happening page by page. And so they are isolating. A screaming comes across the sky, and this is how they describe it. These opening words are forever linked with the V2 rocket. They may bring associations with bombs whistling as they fall, or with the high whine of post-war jet engines. But they are not, and this is boldface, they are not a description of the sound actually made in target zones by the V2 rocket, which was typically the sharp cracking explosion of the 750 kilogram warhead, followed by a deeper, more or less extended sonic boom. So they feel that it's necessary to make this distinction here, right? That this is, probably not the sound of the rocket itself. It's probably the sound of sirens or something like that. Mm-hmm. And what they miss, of course, right, in thinking that this is like some sort of like salient distinction is this like an example of good writing? I mean, when let's imagine for a second that they're wrong, that this is in fact a screaming rocket. We've heard this kind of phrasing forever, right?
Yeah.
Screaming rockets, right? This kind of like, anthropomorphism of everything from like birds to rockets, right? It's very, very common. The fact that this would be like the first line in what is supposed to be like a great American novel, again, if you're attuned to the arts and you're attuned to writing, this should alarm you at least a little bit. And even if it's not a rocket, right? Because they're these fans are very, very sort of emphatic that it's not, it's, let's say, sirens, that doesn't change the analysis at all, right? A screaming siren, that is also trite, right? It's not
Yeah.
really, it's not a good opening sentence, right? You want an opening sentence to hook. You want an opening sentence to be memorable in some other way. You want an opening sentence to, do something other than what's happening here, right?
Yeah, even if it was human screaming or
Yeah,
animal screaming, right?
yeah,
If it's literal screaming,
yeah,
okay. So
yeah,
people, in war, people are terrified and they scream. I mean, again, there's just nothing particularly to draw you in on that. It's pretty plain. And I mean, obviously we'll get to it later, but I told you in my notes, it's really interesting even to compare, he uses the verb screaming in this first line of the book. It's not particularly well executed or insightful or interesting. And Vonnegut uses the the verb screaming in a very humorous way in one of the scenes fairly early on in his book that I'll quote from later. So already, Vonnegut won, Pynchon nil.
yeah. And it's fun. It's funny that you mentioned a human screaming, because there was another analysis that would say, like, this might be referring to V2 rockets. This might be referring to sirens, or perhaps they say perhaps more poetically referring to the terror of the people in the city. So, and they call it poetically, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's the opposite. It's prosaic. It's not poetic. It's prosaic. But just like they need to like force something into it, right? So
Yeah.
they turn something that is clearly prosaic into something that it's not, right? So anyway, to go on, it is too late. The evacuation still proceeds, but it's all theater. There are no lights inside the cars, no light anywhere. Above him, the lift girders, old as an iron queen, and glass somewhere far above that would let the light of day through. Again, like we have like another cliche, second paragraph, right? We have like, the light of day. And
Hmm.
that's not, it's, that could be like a little bit sort of idiomatic, but in the context specifically of like war and darkness and this, alternating light and darkness, to force like this light of day, into this context, right? That is going to be a naked cliche, right? It's much harder to sort of say that it's being subverted in any way given the context. But it's night. He's afraid of the way the glass will fall. Soon it will be a spectacle, the fall of a crystal palace, but coming down in total blackout without one glint of light, only great invisible crashing. And I think that's a little bit better, right? Like that's like more decent. And that's the
Yeah.
thing, like, given that it's so like there's so many modifiers, there's so much over description, it stands to reason that if you have a book that's, almost 800 pages and it's over modified and there's too much description and too much of this, too much of that, you're going to chance upon decent writing. You're even going to chance upon some good writing, some good phrasings. I think there are some good phrasings and some good writing in the text, but
Hmm.
in the context of 800 pages where most of it is not like that, that this is just like a process of randomness, right?
Yeah.
I could feed text into an AI and get a whole lot of garbage back, and every once in a while you're going to get an interesting line. Every once in a while you're going to get an interesting phrase. Every once in a while you're going to get an interesting juxtaposition. But that's not that's not to say anything deeper than that.